How's everyone doing? Welcome to the Strategy Room on this Saturday night, June 21st, 2025. We are now officially into the summer season, which is fantastic. Unfortunately, I'm bringing you some live breaking news, a little somber tonight as we kind of start off because we did drop bombs on Iran. Obviously, very disturbing, information, but I'm definitely going to say some prayers tonight for our men and women in the armed services that they hopefully stay safe. I'm also going to pray that this conflict does not take us into a much larger conflict, a much larger theater of war, as it were. So I'm sure a lot of people out there will be keeping tabs on all this stuff over the next few hours and well into the night and into tomorrow morning to see kind of what happens. Undoubtedly there will be some level of retaliation. We just don't know what that is going to be, whether that's going to be steered toward us or whether it'll be steered toward Israel. We just don't know. We're just going to have to wait to, see what happens here. But it happened. It just happened. So the bombs went in, and now we all got to pray for the best. So we'll see what happens with that. But that being said, I do have a great show lined up for everybody as always tonight. We're going to be kicking it off with a whole bunch of stuff. Obviously, we had the Fed decision this week, a couple of economic indicators. The Senate passed the Genius Act, which is stablecoin legislation. So we're going to get into talking about that. But I have a ton of articles just covering, what's going on in the labor market, what's going on in commercial real estate. We're going to take a look at some of the things that have been progressing in China. As far as what's going on with China economically. I have an interesting article on what's happening with some of the bankers over in China. I think people will be very, very interested to see that one. But as usual, I'll tell you what, let's kick off here tonight. And as I always like to do, so here is the U.S. debt clock. And as you can see, we did it this week. We passed the 37 trillion mark in the national debt. We're still sitting at our $2 trillion federal budget deficit. The Doge clock is now up to $527 billion with savings per taxpayer of $4,694. Again, not really sure how that's calculating or what's going on. I mean, Doge does continue to work. There are, if you go to their website, you will see like they do continue to post things basically saying, hey, we kind of got rid of this contract or that contract, but I just don't know. Obviously things have gotten a lot quieter since Elon left. So, we don't really know. No one as of yet has stepped forward to be, the mouthpiece for Doge so we just don't have a great update on what exactly the status is there. And like you said, it appears like they continue to do work, but we're, to the level, to the extent, what they're doing, how they're doing it, like we don't know. But like I said, we'll keep following it. We'll keep seeing what happens with it. Now, I would like to point out the debt to GDP. This number right here in the upper left-hand quarter, just below the Doge clock, it ticked up to 123%. That was hovering at around 122. So it is kind of interesting that ticked up, but I guess not surprising that since we crossed the 37 trillion threshold there on the national debt. So not great things in that regard. I am going to come back to some X stories and some X data and X posts and stuff that I had because there was a lot of really interesting stuff this week. But let's get right into the big news of the week. Obviously, the Federal Reserve holds the key rate steady. As we could see here in the CNBC article, basically Fed holds key rate steady, still sees 2 more cuts this year. Powell, didn't really allude to that, really danced around it. I think, Jeremy Powell, I really think is running out of bullets really fast here. And, he's the heat, as you will see in a minute, is really starting to ratchet up on Mr. Powell because his rationale that he presented at this meeting for not wanting to lower interest rates was pretty flimsy, pretty weak. It's been getting weaker every meeting, but I think this week might be the turning point, and you're going to see here why in just a second. So, but let's get so Federal Reserve kept its key borrowing rate targeted in a range between 4.25 and 4.5%, where it has been since December. However, the central bank expects inflation to remain elevated and sees lower economic growth ahead. Still, the Federal Open Market Committee expects to make 2 rate reductions later this year, according to the closely watched dot plot. Now, again, remember, that's according to the dot plot. That's not what Jeremy Powell said. Jeremy Powell basically didn't say anything about cutting rates this week. It's just, but yet they still have the rate cuts on the dot plot. But again, we're getting mixed signals here. Like people like the financial guys like CNBC, they keep adding in this information on the dot plot to basically try to give everybody this glimmer of hope. I just think that Jeremy Powell, I think if it's up to him right now, his plan is to sit there until May of next year, finish out his term, and he's not going to lower rates. He is not going to, unless the heat gets dramatically turned up on him, which is happening. It's happening. But unless the heat continues to get really cranked up on him, I don't think he's going to do anything. I think he's going to sit. I think he's going to sit pat and just say, he keeps trying to create these arguments for the boogeyman tariffs. The boogeyman tariffs are going to destroy everything, and we're going to have all this rampant, out of control inflation and everything else. Yet the inflation's not materializing, and I would also add to this conversation the notion of stagflation. What is stagflation? Well, stagflation is where you have really low economic growth, like the unemployment rate spikes up, you have low economic growth, and you have very high inflation. Like inflation's going up, economy's in the toilet, job market's in the toilet, and it just sits there. Okay, thus the stagflation. Like you can't get the inflation down, you can't get the employment up, you're kind of stuck. Stagflation is what we experienced in the 1970s. Now, so the economic, let's think about this for a second. So the GDP numbers for the first quarter were not great. They were definitely weren't negative, but they were very low. Unemployment still below 5%. The unemployment, the labor market, technically, if you go by the U3, I think the U6 is much higher. U6 is hanging around at 7.5, 7.7% unemployment, which I think is the real unemployment rate. But like I said, let's use their numbers. Let's use CNBC's numbers. Let's use the Fed's numbers. By their calculations, the unemployment market is showing a little weakness, but it's basically doing just fine. It's sitting at there at 4.5%. That's fine. Like that's doing just fine. Like I said, GDP is a little low, but inflation's coming down. And so they keep making this argument like, oh, we're going to have the stagflation. We're going to have the stagflation. Well, are we really going to have the stagflation? Because I don't see it. I see inflation coming down. I see I see the economic activity toward the later half in the year really beginning to pick up. I think 2026 is going to be a million times better. I don't see it. This stagflation to me, and the whole tariff conversation just feels like a whole lot of just fear mongering. And it's, and it keeps coming out like, oh, we got all this data. Like really, like what data do you really have there? So, but anyway, hang on. Let's go through. So Federal Reserve on Wednesday kept interest rates steady amid expectations of higher inflation and lower economic growth ahead, and still pointed to 2 reductions later this year, with markets expecting no change of a central bank move this week. The Federal Open Markets Committee, the FOMC, kept its key borrowing rate target in the range. Along with the rate decision, the committee indicated through its closely watched dot plot that 2 cuts by the end of 25 are still on the table. However, it lopped off 1 reduction for both 26 and 27, putting the expected future rate cuts at 4 or a full percentage point. The plot indicated continued uncertainty from Fed officials about the future of rates, each dot representing one official's expectation for rates. There was a wide dispersion on the matrix, with an outlook pointing to a Fed funds rate around 3.5% in 2027. Yeah, we can't wait till 2027 to get the Fed funds rate down to 3.4%. That's not going to work. 7 of the 19 participants indicated they wanted no cuts this year, up from 4 in March. However, the committee approved the policy statement unanimously. So again, I've literally done episodes on this whole notion of dissension at the Fed. The Fed, the Fed does not culturally, they don't like dissent. They don't like dissension, but got some very interesting things from a Fed governor that I'm going to point out here in just a second. So let's go to the Fed's statement. Okay, so this is their actual statement. So although swings in net exports have affected the data, recent indicators suggest that economic activity has continued to expand at a solid pace. So economic activity is still expanding at a solid pace. The unemployment rate remains low, just like I said, and labor market conditions remain solid. Inflation remains somewhat elevated. They got to use this nonsense word. Well, somewhat. It's not, it's not elevated anymore. It's just somewhat elevated. The committee seeks to achieve maximum employment and inflation at the rate of 2% over the longer run. Uncertainty about the economic outlook has diminished, but remains elevated. Again, more nonsense. The committee is attentive to the risk of both sides of its dual mandate. In support of its goal, the committee decided to maintain the target rate for the federal funds. In considering the extent and timing of additional adjustments to the target range for the federal funds rate, the committee will carefully assess incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. The committee will continue reducing its holdings of Treasury securities and agency debt and agency mortgage-backed securities. The committee is strongly committed to supporting maximum employment and returning inflation to its 2% objective. In assessing the appropriate stance of monetary policy, the committee will continue to monitor the implications of incoming information for the economic outlook. The committee would be prepared to adjust the stance of monetary policy as appropriate if risks emerge that could impede the attainment of the committee's goals. The committee's assessments will take into account a wide range of information, including readings on labor market conditions, inflation pressures and inflation expectations, and financial and international developments. So just a couple other notes. So this was a unanimous policy vote. The Fed stated that uncertainty about the economic outlook has diminished but remains elevated, and the Fed will continue reducing its holdings of Treasury securities, agency debt, and agency mortgage-backed securities. In other words, they're going to continue reducing their balance sheet. So they're going to continue working on that. Let's jump into this for a second. So why the Fed isn't cutting rates despite cool inflation. So the central bank is in a holding pattern as it waits to see what worsens first, inflation or the labor market. So the Federal Reserve, obviously, they held the rate steady. Inflation expectations, crucial for the Fed, are tricky to measure. You got to love the wording here, tricky to measure, but influence actual inflation. Recent data presents a mixed outlook. The Fed is weighing the risks of rising inflation expectations against a potentially weakening labor market and setting monetary policy. So there are good reasons to think the Federal Reserve would be preparing to cut interest rates this week due to recent improvements on inflation, if not for the risk that tariffs pose to prices. So you gotta love this. Instead, Fed officials are on track to extend their wait-and-see posture on Wednesday. Fed officials at their meeting will be assessing how the economy handles the initial months of historically large tariff hikes. The last 3 months' inflation readings have been mild. Still, officials are worried over how tariff announcements since March could disrupt what economists refer to as inflation expectations. And again, they just go through the whole, the whole boogeyman here. Sentiment's down a little bit, It's just, but again, this idea of, the tariffs are going to bring Armageddon. I think people are kind of over that now. And I think people are seeing through this argument is not going to be this major upheaval that people thought it was going to be. And obviously, Trump rips into too late Jeremy Powell after Fed holds rates steady. President Donald Trump criticized Federal Reserve Chair Jeremy Powell after the central bank kept rates steady for a fourth time. Trump called Powell a real dummy in a late-night Truth Social post. Trump has signaled that he plans to soon announce Powell's successor for when his term as chair ends next year. So President Donald Trump ripped into Federal Reserve Chairman Jeremy Powell on Thursday, calling him destructive after the central bank kept interest rates steady on Wednesday. Trump said, "Too late, Powell is costing the United States hundreds of billions of dollars by not cutting rates," leveling a familiar criticism against the Fed chair who has repeatedly ignored Trump's pressure to cut rates. "We should be 2.5 points lower and save billions on all the Biden short-term debt," Trump wrote Thursday on True Social. Trump also criticized Powell late Wednesday, calling him a real dummy in a near midnight True Social post. Powell, whose term ends in May of 2026, said Wednesday that for the time being, we are well positioned to wait to learn more about the likely course of the economy before considering any adjustments to our policy. Let's see here, but I want to look for something. Europe has had 10 cuts and we have had none. And I guess he's a political guy. I don't know. He's a political guy who's not a smart person, but he's costing the country a fortune, he said outside the White House. Now, again, maybe you agree or don't agree with some of his harsher comments, but here's the thing. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. Europe's had 10 cuts. Central banks all over the world have had 10 cuts. I saw a chart this week. I don't know if I can find it on X here, but somebody I think Trump actually posted. I don't know if it's here or not. But basically he posted like the rates of every central bank around the world, and the United States literally was in the bottom rank with like the bottom four at holding at that 4.25% rate. That's like, again, we're too high. Our rates are too high. Other countries are doing stuff you have to laugh when you listen to the other announcements by the other central banks around the world. You know what they say? They say, "Oh, well, we're lowering rates to, wait for it, help with tariffs or potential tariffs that may come." So, okay, so if that's the case, why wouldn't Powell be doing the same thing if he's so worried about tariffs? Why wouldn't he be looking to quote unquote, juice the economy just a tad bit? Now I will say this: do we need to be, Trump said here, "Oh, we should be 2.5 points lower." Do I think that we need to be 2.5 points lower? No. But I do think we need to be a point to a point and a half lower. I think we absolutely need, we definitely need to be somewhere in that 3 to 3.5% range on Fed funds. Like that's the spot where we need to get to, and we need to get there, I would say with, definitely within over the next year. Because again, it's not, we need to get the rates down we need to get the real estate market rolling again. We need to get the loan market rolling again. We need to let the government be able to roll over the trillions of dollars in bond markets and treasuries that they have to roll over into longer term treasuries. We need to be able to do that at a reasonable cost. It's not bankrupting the country. And like I said, Powell just doesn't seem to want to help out with that. Now, here's the really interesting thing that happened, okay? Federal Reserve rate cuts could happen as early as July, says Fed Governor Waller. Oh, this is very interesting. Investors expect the next interest rate cut in September. Really? So Federal Reserve could cut interest rates as early as July. Really? Because that's not what the FOMC, that they just issued a unanimous policy on Wednesday saying that, hey man, they're not cutting rates. But Waller just came out here and kind of dropped the bomb on Friday. He said this week, the U.S. Central Bank, including him, voted to leave interest rates unchanged for the fourth consecutive meeting as officials wait for more tariff-related data and clarity. But while the Federal Reserve has signaled a wait-and-see stance, Waller believes the Fed can act at the next Federal Open Market Committee meeting. During a June 20th interview with CNBC's Squawk Box, Waller said he doesn't believe that President Donald Trump's tariffs will reignite inflation or pose a risk to economic growth or the job market. Wow, that was not anything what we just heard from Jeremy Powell or what we've been hearing from Jeremy Powell. But the fact that this is very interesting. So Waller went along with the committee. He voted in line. He didn't do the dissenting vote. Okay. But yet 2 days later, he comes out and drops this bomb on CNBC and basically says, yeah, we might cut rates in July. And oh, by the way, I don't think that these tariffs are going to reignite inflation or pose a risk to the economic growth or the job market. That's wow. Okay. That's exactly what I've been saying. But now we finally have somebody from the Fed saying it. And this is the thing. Now I would pose this. Let's go back for just a second here. What is this? What did this article say here? Trump has signaled that he plans to soon announce Powell's successor for when his term as chair ends next week. Do you think it was an accident that Mr. Waller went on to CNBC and dropped this out there? No, Mr. Waller is sending you the signal he wants Powell's job. This is the job. This is the job interview right here. Okay, he's basically saying, I agree with Trump. I don't see any issues. We need to start cutting rates right away. I'm your guy. You need to make me the next head of the Federal Reserve. Okay, that's what this is right here. Okay, you have to read between the lines on these ones. So he just threw his application big time on the president's desk. It basically said, I'm your guy. I want to be the next head of the Federal Reserve. If you want your rate cuts, put me in, coach. So this is, but he just said here on CNBC what a lot of people are starting, what I know to be true, what a lot of other people are basically waking up to here over the last, particularly the last month or so. So, but let's go on here for just a second. So Waller argued that any tariff inflation will likely be limited and that the monetary authority should look through and assess the underlying trend of inflation. Right now, the data from the last few months has been showing that trend inflation is looking pretty good, even on a 12-month basis, Waller said. So I've labeled these good news rate cuts, even if inflation comes down to target, we can actually bring rates down. In May, the headline annual inflation rate came in lower than expected rate at 2.4%. Additionally, other inflation metrics such as the producer price index and import prices were little changed last month. In addition to inflation, Waller says GDP growth and the unemployment rate are running near the Federal Reserve's long-run target. I think we're in that position that we could do this as early as July, he said. That would be my view, whether the committee would go along with it or not. However, while he would not support rapidly cutting interest rates, the president has demanded 1% worth of rate cuts. He does not want to keep waiting until there is a crash in the broader economy. We've been on pause for 6 months to wait and see, and so far the data has been fine, Waller said. Why do we want to wait until we actually see a crash before we start cutting rates? So I'm all in favor of saying maybe we should start thinking about cutting the policy rate at the next meeting because we don't want to wait till the job market tanks before we start cutting the policy rate. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, what was interesting, I will also put this out there too. Jeremy Powell said during his press conference, he got what I thought was a good question from one of the journalists in the room. And they basically asked him, they said, listen, inflation wasn't coming down the last time you started cutting rates back in September. And as a matter of fact, inflation started to spike up and you just kept cutting rates for 4 straight months. So why over the last 6 months you've actually seen inflation come down a lot? That is where it's trending over the last 4 or 5 months. And yet you're still totally, unwilling to even consider rate cuts. What's the rationale for that? Can you explain that? And of course, Powell with that, stumbled and fumbled and bumbled all over the place. But again, I think the press conference, if you were watching the live stream last week, I think the press conference went exactly how I said it was going to go. I said it was going to go blah, 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 not cutting rates, blah, 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 tariffs, blah, 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 make believe higher inflation numbers, blah, 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 looking at the data, but blah, blah, blah. End of the day, I'm taking my ball, going home and not doing anything. And I think that's pretty much exactly how it went. Like there was no surprise. let's see here. Then again, now CNBC also reported, Waller's hopes for a rate cut could be cut short by a 1970s replay. So again, and you know what the really fascinating thing about this is? Last year, going into the last 6 months of last year, I talked about stagflation, how we were literally moving into a stagflationary economy. I believe that had President Trump not gotten elected, we absolutely would be staring in. If we were looking at this second Joe Biden administration here, I think we absolutely would be sitting in a stagflationary economy right this minute. We're not going to. Stagflation is not going to happen now, and why they keep pushing this is beyond me. Because we're not going to have it. We're not going to have a stagflationary. We could. You could always have a recession, but a recession is not stagflation. And a recession, I think, even if we had a mild one, I think we would come out of it pretty quickly. And then again, here's this article. Investors see stagflation ahead, but slow interest rate cuts. CNBC Fed survey finds. The June CNBC Fed survey continued to indicate weaker growth and higher inflation than at the beginning of the year, and most say uncertainty over tariff policy remains high. The Fed is expected to stand pat, which they did. Respondents say there remains a considerable lack of clarity, with 71% reporting they are very or somewhat uncertain over the trade policy. Now, I would ask the question, who is it exactly that they were surveying? The Fed survey continued. It's like the probability of recession in the next year has fallen to 38%, down from 53% in May, but above the 23% level of January, before President Donald Trump's aggressive tariff policy was unveiled. Similarly, gross domestic product is now expected to grow 1.13% on average, up from 0.8% in the prior survey, but less than half of the January expectation. So, and again, I don't see this. I really don't see this. I'm reporting it to you guys. I want to point it out. I want to be fair. I want to say, hey, here's what they're seeing out there. Here's what I'm feeling. I'm not feeling this now. There are people, a lot of smart people, that would make the argument that would say, oh, well, the tariff thing the inflation's going to hit because, basically companies have been stockpiling right now. But have they really been stockpiling right now? We've seen a few companies do some stockpiling, but I think for the most part, you haven't really seen that. And I say that because of some of the things that I saw this week being reported out there, with business inventories and other things like that. I don't think I don't think you're seeing this like massive buildup right now in inventories that is going to hit like a thud with all of these supply chain issues and everything else. I just don't think that is really going to materialize at the end of the day. Now that leads us into things like this. Tariff engineering is making a comeback as businesses employ creative ways to skirt higher duties. Global manufacturers are rethinking their product design, tapping into a legal technique known as tariff engineering to lower tariff costs. The practice involves changing the item's materials, altering its dimensions or compositions. Tariff engineering is legal as long as the changes generally alter the product's characteristics. Would you be bothered if your coat was officially classified as a windbreaker or a raincoat, or your shoes as slippers? Probably not. Businesses do not care, as classifications under a preferred category can help them pay lower tariff rates. But tariff engineering, a legal practice that precedes Trump, involves changing an item's materials, altering its dimensions or compositions so that the finished product can be justified to fit in a different harmonized system code, expert says. Although most new tariffs added during Trump's second term are broad-based, the U.S. government has carved out exemptions for certain products, leaving doors open for companies to benefit through tariff engineering, trade lawyers pointed out. Again, I don't know. I mean, maybe some companies can mess around with this or can find some way to kind of, massage this, if you will, a little bit. But I don't see it at the end of the day. I think if you got to pay higher tariffs, you're going to pay higher. But again, you have to keep in mind, and I'm going to show you this in a second here. You have to keep in mind that these the tariffs are to get people outside the country to pay us more money. and to make it easier for people in the US so we can have more investment in the US and we can start to produce more in the US, and people in the US can see their companies grow because it's easier for them to compete against outside companies, international companies, China, because they got, like, in other words, if China, if in the US they have to sell their product for $100, and China could do it for 50, but now with the tariffs, their product now costs 120. Now all of a sudden that $100 product to the US becomes, whoa, that start looking a lot better. Okay. And yes, okay, you're going to sit there and say, oh yeah, okay, well, it's more expensive because it's $100 over $50 or whatever. But this is all going to this is all going to level out. It will all level out. And I could promise you that it will balance itself out. Will some things get out of whack for a little bit? Yes, they probably will. But overall, in time, this stuff is going to pan out because you're going to see more growth of U.S. companies. And why do I say that? Okay, let's look at a couple of things here. Okay, Trump announces finalized U.S.-China trade deal. I seriously don't think this is finalized. I don't think this is anywhere close to finalized. I think they just agreed on a couple of things this week. But U.S. tariffs on trade goods will rise to 55%, while China will supply rare earths. Now, that was, like, again, but we both got something we really wanted. Okay, China didn't want the tariffs to be at 140%. They got it brought back down to 55, which is still a lot higher than what we were charging them. And we wanted the rare earth minerals and materials. So China's going to open that back. They had been withholding that, so now they're going to open it back up and give it back to us. So, or at least start shipping that stuff again. U.S. President Donald Trump said the United States has reached a deal with China as both sides wrapped up their trade talks in London. In a June 11th post on social media platform Truth Social, the president confirmed that the agreement will ensure that China supplies the necessary rare earths and full magnets. In exchange, the United States will allow Chinese students to attend its colleges and universities, which Trump said has always been good with him. We are getting a total of 55% tariffs. China is getting 10%. The president wrote in all caps, relationship is excellent. The deal will be subject to final approval by Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who joined U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer overseas, said U.S. Tariff rates on Chinese goods will not change again. You could definitely say that, Lutnick said when asked on CNBC's Money Movers whether tariffs on Beijing will change again. Negotiations in London will stabilize and balance the trade relationship between the United States and China. So, yes, I don't think this is over. I really don't think this is over. I think that there is still a lot more to come here. China's not going to roll over that easy. They're just not. And as far and I look, the one thing that I really one thing I really don't agree with here is the United States will allow Chinese students to attend colleges and universities. Yeah, I really think that needs to be questioned. I think that needs to be looked at real hard, because I think we have a major problem with the number of Chinese students that are currently in our universities. I think we have a major problem with what they may or may not be doing. Some people may not like to hear that, but I think that's the truth, and I think that's been happening for a long time now. I think the things that are going on are very shady and unscrupulous, and they just need to be looked at a lot harder. Okay, furthermore on this, Trump touts U.S.-UK trade deal signaled at the G7. So as part of the agreement, the United States will offer reduced tariffs on an annual quota of 100,000 UK vehicle imports. So during the G7 summit in Canada opened on Monday with significant divisions on various issues, but a breakthrough emerged from a bilateral meeting between Donald Trump and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. On the sidelines, Trump announced the signing of a US-UK trade agreement after his meeting with the UK leader. We signed it and it's done. It's a fair deal for both. And this is a good deal for us. It'll produce a lot of jobs, a lot of income. Starmer echoed the sentiment, noting that the agreement slashes tariffs on automobiles and aerospace. This is a very good day for both our countries. Let me see here. If I was looking down here more. But But basically, our tariff rate is going to go up to 10% on all UK goods. So we're going to be making a lot more money from the UK, and then their tariffs on us actually went down, which is fantastic, which is good news. So again, we are cutting some of these deals, which are definitely going to help here, build momentum for further trade deals with other countries. Now, but here's a couple of examples of what is playing out here. Texas Instruments plans to invest $60 billion in U.S. amid Trump push for domestic manufacturing. Again, fantastic. Absolutely what we want to see. Texas Instruments said it plans to invest over $60 billion in U.S. semiconductor production. The investment includes 7 facilities and is expected to create 60,000 jobs, the company said. Texas Instruments is the latest company to announce domestic expansion plans amid President Trump's push for American manufacturing. I announced last week that GM basically said they're putting $4 billion back in. So these guys are doing 60. Here's yet another article. Micron Technology to invest $200 billion in U.S. semiconductor manufacturing. The company will additionally invest in research and development. So Micron Technology plans to invest more than $200 billion in semiconductor manufacturing in the U.S., a move it estimates will create roughly 90,000 direct and indirect jobs. The memory and storage solutions company disclosed the investment on Thursday in partnership with the Trump administration, which has sought to increase domestic manufacturing and position the U.S. as the dominant player in artificial intelligence. Again, I mean, this is fantastic stuff. This is what we're talking about here. This is the investment. Like, in other words, and this is why Jeremy Powell's argument to me falls flat on its face and rings very hollow, because he doesn't talk about this. He wants to talk about the tariff. Oh, the tariffs are going to create all this inflation and it's going to wreck the economy and all this crazy stuff. But he's not talking about the other side of it. He's not talking about the fact that the trade deficit is coming down. It was cut in half, literally, in May. He's not talking about the increased revenue. We could see upwards of $600 billion in tariff revenue coming in the door. He doesn't account or talk for any about that. He doesn't talk about the investment being made. This is only a couple of examples. When I talked about GM last week, Micron Technologies here, Texas Instruments here. Again, this is $260 billion. This is 150,000 new jobs, good jobs. These aren't jobs working at Wendy's. These are really solid. And again, I should have said it. I don't mean to knock anybody working at Wendy's. Wendy's is a great place to work. Love the people at Wendy's. I don't mean to belittle what you do or anything like that. But again, I'm just trying to say that these are really good paying, strong jobs. These are a lot of probably, $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 jobs, over 6-figure paying jobs. Those are really strong, good jobs that you want to see in the economy. So again, this is why I think the argument that Powell's making is good. And again, you're only going to see more pressure on Powell as the days and the weeks and the months go by here. You're only going to see more pressure on it. And I would say that it was interesting watching him physically at the last meeting, because you could just tell that all this is taking a toll on him, because he doesn't look, he's looking older. He's looking older. He's looking tired. He's looking like, it's time to go. But let's look at a couple of things here. Just a couple of stories we're going to get back to. This was fascinating. 7 California men indicted in the largest jewelry heist in U.S. history. Fascinating. All right, I might have to cover that in a separate episode. Philadelphia Federal Reserve manufacturing contracts again in June as new order growth slows further. Price increases remain above average, and employment index fell to lowest level since lockdowns in May of 20, indicating job losses, while workweek index also fell. The entire 18.2% increase in retail sales over the last 4 years was just inflation increasing sales prices, while the actual volume of sales fell 1% over that time. 4 years and zero progress. You know what? Let me me blow this up a little bit so you guys can see this a little bit better. While bank reserves are down 20.3% from their peak, they're up 20.4% from the start of 23, and more importantly, are up 110.8% from the start of 20. And misguided monetary policy is keeping them elevated. So there you go. That's a chart. Look at that. Look at that bad boy right there. You got to love that. So Fed losses are now over $232 billion. This is money that has gone to banks, including foreign ones, instead of to the Treasury, and now taxpayers will have to make up the difference. Powell's replacement must end the IOR stopping policy and stop letting RRPs, that's reverse repos, drain back to zero. Yes, that is quite the chart there, man. Yeah, and notice Jeremy Powell, he doesn't talk about this at the press conferences. You know, when he's getting, you know, when he's up there spouting about, you know, this, that, and the other thing, I would ask Jeremy Powell, hey, Jeremy, why do you have unrealized losses on the balance sheet of the Fed of over $1 trillion? Why are you generating losses of $232 billion? Like, what are you doing to fix this, man? What are you doing to correct that? Okay, no, and it's amazing. Like, nobody asks him these questions. I would be pelting him with these questions. I digress. Government jobs are falling. 22,000 federal government jobs were lost in May, the most in at least 4 months. This marks the fourth consecutive monthly decline. Year to date, federal government jobs have declined by 59,000 to 2.96 million, the lowest since November of 2024. It's not really much of a low if you're only going back to November of last year. All right, we'll go by that. Okay. This is Professor Peter St. Onge. If you guys don't follow him on X, I highly recommend it. He really does a great job and really puts some great stuff out there. This was interesting. So 2 years ago, this is Zero Hedge. 2 years ago, we first said that all job growth since COVID had been gone to illegal aliens, and people got angry. Well, employees terrified of ICE raids are failing to show up at work. So the U.S. labor landscape is being disrupted by high-profile workplace raids by immigration agents, scaring off undocumented workers and leaving employers unsure of how they'll manage without them. The economic fallout of the raids and deportations could be significant, with California potentially losing $275 billion in economic output, and industries like construction and agriculture severely disrupted. Farmers and industry leaders are calling for a pathway to legal immigration status for undocumented workers, citing the importance of their labor to the food supply chain and the need for stable workforce. So, you know, again, this is a problem. So why, I asked the question, why were all these employers hiring all these illegal and undocumented immigrants who came into the U.S.? Like, they're obviously taking advantage of these individuals for being able to pay them well below market. It's obvious that they were basically exploiting the labor. You know, what is up with that? Like, you know, what's up with that? And then I saw another funny one this week, and I'm trying to remember exactly where that was at, but there was a company that, you know, they had a raid, and I think they lost like 100 employees, and they were sitting there going, oh no, how are we going to go on? Like, people aren't going to do these jobs. And then like a day later, they literally had hundreds of people, hundreds of regular everyday U.S. citizens lined up with filling out applications looking to take those jobs. And it was basically like so much for the idea of Americans not wanting to work or not wanting to do some of these jobs. I think that fallacy got completely blown up. All right, Treasury cash down to $409 billion. Yeah, okay, so this is like reverse purchase repos. We're heading down to zero. I think we're now down to like $158 billion or something like that. So that's not good. I'll talk more about that later. So, and again, getting back to the inventory thing for a second here. So here's an interesting chart. So essentially all of the increase in business inventories over the last 5 years from April 20 to April 25 was just inflation. Shocking, since the nominal increase was 33.7% over that time. So again, this gets back to that conversation of, when people are saying, oh, well, they're stockpiling all this inventory, again, trying to help out against the tariffs or whatever. Like, well, are we really seeing that? Because over the last 5 years, the big growth in inventory was really more in inflation. It wasn't necessarily in the actual physical inventory itself. So it's just interesting. It is, like I said, just interesting stuff to point out. In President Trump's first 5 months in office, blue-collar wage growth saw its largest increase in 60 years. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. Yes, average U.S. family health insurance premium really blowing up. Here, this just popped in. Let's see here. Powell's folly, how the Fed chairman tanked America's credit rating. Yeah, there you go. All right, let's get back over here to, okay, let's look at a couple of economic indicators here real quick, like some stuff that came out this week. We'll leave we've beat up on Mr. Powell enough tonight. So we'll get back to beating him up in due time, but we'll leave him alone for right now. All right. Retail sales fell 0.9% in May, worse than expected as consumers pulled back. So retail sales declined 0.9%, even more than the 0.6% drop that was expected from the Dow Jones consensus. However, excluding a series of items such as auto dealers, building materials, supplies, gas stations, and others, sales actually increased 0.4%. So the pullback in retail sales came despite surveys showing that consumer sentiment actually increased in May. Well, the question is like, did they just cut back on big ticketed items and not all the other stuff? I mean, that's kind of, so let's see here. The decline followed a 0.1% loss in April and came at a time of unease over tariffs and geopolitical tensions. Sales rose 3.3% from a year ago. Excluding autos, sales fell 0.3%, also worse than the estimate for a gain of 0.1%. However, excluding a series of items such as auto dealers, building materials, supplies, gas stations, and other, sales increased 0.4%. That reading, known as the control group, is what the department uses when calculating gross domestic product. So sales have been generally slow through the year, though spending peaked in March as consumers sought to get ahead of President Donald Trump's April Liberation Day tariff announcement. Building materials and garden stores saw sales fall 2.7%, while sliding energy prices pushed gasoline station receipts down 2%. Motor vehicle and parts retailers were off 3.5%, while bars and restaurants saw sales decline of just 0.9%. On the plus side, miscellaneous retailers gained 2.9%, while online sales rose 0.9%, and furniture stores increased sales by 1.2%. So interesting. So we'll have to, obviously keep an eye on retail sales in the coming months ahead. Home builder sentiment nears pandemic low as economic uncertainty plagues consumers. Yes. So builder sentiment in June dropped 2 points from May to 32 on the National Association of Home Builders Wells Fargo Housing Market Index. Anything below 50 is considered negative. Analysts had been expecting a slight improvement given recent tariff negotiation and pullbacks by the Trump administration. This index has only seen a lower reading than June's level since 2012. So again, we're seeing this low builder sentiment, and mortgage demand drops even as rates fall to the lowest level since April. The average contracted interest rate for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage decreased to 6.84% from 6.93% last week, but mortgage demand from home buyers fell 3%. Demand to refinance a home loan dropped by 2%. Now, here's the mortgage market. So I want to go back to something for a minute. I thought I was done beating up on Mr. Powell. Maybe I'm not. I want to let me search for somebody for a minute here. See if I can find. Okay, let's look at something here. I want to see if I could go back to. Okay, Bill Pulte, he called for the resignation of Jeremy Powell this week, but I wanted to show you guys I'm looking for a couple things in particular. Let's see here. Here we go. Jeremy Powell is a main reason for the housing supply crisis in this country. By improperly keeping interest rates high, Jeremy Powell is trapping homeowners in low rate mortgages and choking off existing home sales, directly fueling the housing supply crisis. He must lower rates. Yes, and I think that was one of the key things there, and that's what started. Bill Pulte. And then Bill Pulte basically got up on CNBC and basically said, Jeremy Powell needs to resign, if he doesn't want to reduce the rates. Again, so he's really coming out, going after Powell. What data is Jeremy Powell looking at to keep rates up? He's looking at no data. Americans are being hurt by Jay Powell. He needs to resign. Fannie and Freddie are now a thriving company. Officers no longer a ghost town. Cafeterias are full. We're so back. And again, he talked about this different things that are going on, but again, head of agency over Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac calls for Fed Chair Powell to resign. And then, why do all these people need to speak next week? Stop being defensive, Jeremy, and just lower rates. Thank you. So they all have to audition. Doesn't Bill know they're all auditioning for the next head to be head of the Federal Reserve. And then Senator Tommy Tuberville, he jumped in on obviously the fire Jeremy Powell train. So I think what this shows is basically that, the momentum is now building. People are basically saying, like, look, right here, he wrote, too late. Jeremy Powell's out of touch with hardworking Americans who spend money on auto loans, credit cards, and mortgages. Wells Fargo and Tom Lee are now disagreeing with the Federal Reserve Chairman Jeremy Powell on his fanciful no data claims of an inflation shock. That's a great clip. You should go look at that. They basically say, no, Powell, like, this data he keeps talking about, it's not there. So again, I just point that out to everybody just to show that again, there is pressure building up now on Jeremy Powell. People are not buying the excuses. The excuses are not working. Trade deals are going to start coming in here. I said this at the beginning of the year. The trade deals they're going to take all year. I mean, they were going to take 6 to 12 months for all that stuff to come to fruition. They were not going to happen overnight. And while the administration certainly would have loved to have had these trade deals just happen like bang, 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 that just was never reality. That was never going to happen. But they will happen. They will happen. And as obviously as a few more deals, I think, get done here. They're still working on China. UK is done. I think there's probably another 30 or 40 countries that they're having ongoing active discussions with, and so I think a lot more is going to start to happen here in the months ahead. So and again, Jeremy Powell, do I want Jeremy Powell to be fired or to get kicked out or whatever? Like, no, I want him to just finish his term. The discussions about his legacy or something else left for another day. But again, he's got to lower the rates. He has to lower the rates at this point. I mean, it's just gotten absurd that he's just sitting there and just refuses. And it's obvious that what he's doing is political. It's totally political. He's got an axe to grind. He's got a grudge against Trump, but I mean, come on, man. Like, you're literally going to shaft the entire country because of your private vendetta or your private grudge, and that's I think really what it is at the end of the day. But hey, look, that's for him to figure out, and we'll see what happens in the weeks or months ahead. So, but okay, where am I at here? All right, we got a few minutes till we hit the hour mark here, so I want to show you guys. This is really interesting. I look at the World Gold Council. If anybody has never gone to their website, they have excellent research that they have on the gold market all over the world. What's happening with the London Bullion Market Exchange, Singapore's big market exchange in New York. So they do some great research. So you can see here up, if we go to the tabs, they have data, they got research. So they just came out with the Central Bank Gold Reserves Survey 2025. So central banks, the executive summary. So central banks have accumulated over 1,000 tons of gold in each of the last 3 years, up significantly from the 400 to 500 ton average over the preceding decade. This marked acceleration in the pace of accumulation has occurred against a backdrop of geopolitical and economic uncertainty, which has clouded the outlook for reserve managers and investors alike. So yes, so the central banks around the world continue to load up on gold. We'll come back to some of these key highlights here in a second. I wanted to show you guys this infographic, just a one-page infographic here from the survey. So 73 total respondents, EMDE banks, 58, advanced economy banks, 15. 43% of respondents indicated their gold reserves will increase in the next 12 months. So all that was 29% and 43%, so 31 out of 72. Emerging 48% and advanced 21%. So most relevant reasons for overall reserve management decisions. So interest rates, 93%, inflation concerns, 81%, geopolitical instability, potential trade conflicts, 59%, and unexpected shocks. Most relevant reasons for holding gold: performance in times of crisis, effective portfolio diversifier, long-term store of value, historical position, no default risk. Let's see here. How do you expect total reserves to change 5 years from now? So higher. Gold, 76%. So it's interesting. US dollar, only 10%. Euro, 42%. RMB, 62%. Unchanged, only 17% gold, 17% dollar, kind of interesting. And then lower was only 7%. So most think that gold is going to continue to increase over in other words, their purchases of gold are going to increase over the next 5 years by 76%. Or 76% believe that they'll increase. So that's interesting. Interesting. And then dollar, 73% think that the dollar is going to be lower. Do you actively manage your gold reserves, and why? So 56% said no, 44% said yes. And of the ones that said yes, 85% are enhancing returns, 22% for risk management, 15% for tactical trading. So top three vaulting locations. So 64% put their gold in the Bank of England. Interesting. 59% keep it in domestic storage, and 17% keep it at the Federal Reserve. So that's interesting. Very interesting. So that's the infographic that came out of this. And I want to show you guys another chart here. So this is from Shadow Stats. Love Mr. Williams over at Shadow Stats. He does some really great things. So I'm going to try to blow this chart up, but I can't make it too big. So there's a bunch of things on this chart here, but what I want to point out here is at the bottom. I'm going to blow this up for just a second here because I want to show you guys. So if you can see here at the bottom, 1970. So you can see here the things are pretty stagnant until 1971. What happened in 1971, you might ask? Well, I will answer that by saying President Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. And once we were off the gold standard, basically over the last 50 years, all hell has broken loose. And thus, I just want you to try to understand this chart for a minute, how mind-boggling this is. So here's where we are. Now, I'm going to show you something else. If you think this is steady at the bottom here, I'm going to show you the next chart here, because this is an even longer time horizon. This is from 1900 up to the present day. So this is the last basically 125 years approximately. This next chart, this is from 1665. Look at that. 1665, hundreds of years under the gold standard, no doubt. Look at that. That's fascinating, right? Fascinating. 300 years. 300 years. Look at that. And literally within a 50-year time horizon, it has gone apoplectic. So let me bring this back down for just a second. All right, look at it. Look at this. We're still going. Still going. haven't hit the top yet. So this is the value of gold. Gold in 1971, when we were on the gold standard, a 1 ounce gold coin was like $20. $20. Where are we at today? Oh, that's right. We're at $3,500 today. $3,500. Now, the blue line here, this is ShadowStats alternate CPI. Now, what do they mean by alternate CPI? Well, they just mean that they use the CPI calculation, the original calculation going back to 1980. Again, the government has changed the calculation of CPI over the last 4 decades, and they have done that to manipulate the CPI to make it look better than it actually is most of the time. But so ShadowStats uses the original calculation, and you can see inflation has just absolutely taken off, and it's up over 3,000% in the last 50 years, which is just, again, mind-boggling. And then CPU and predecessor measures are in red there, and you can see here they're still going up over, even that line is over 300%. But it's just this is a mind-boggling. It's just, like I said, this is a mind-bending chart to look at. Just the value of gold, the value of inflation, and what that is, what taking us off the gold standard has done. And again, I don't want to get into a huge diatribe about this because I've got a lot more articles, a lot more information to cover here tonight before we get out of here. But a couple of main things that everybody should understand is that the reason why this happened, the reason why this has exploded over the last 50 years, starting in 1971 here, was the gold standard perfect? No, it absolutely was not perfect. It had a number of flaws. However, what the point that people always miss, and the point that the point that the politicians never want to talk about is that what did the gold standard really do? The point of the gold standard was to handcuff politicians so that they could not spend whatever amount of money that they wanted to spend whenever they wanted to spend it. That was the whole point of the gold standard. It wasn't to handcuff you and I. It was to handcuff the politicians so that if the politicians wanted to go out and they wanted money, what were they going to have to do? They were going to have to come out and ask the American taxpayer for more money, something that politicians do not like to do, because what does the U.S. taxpayer usually tell them? No. And they usually say, okay, you want more money, make your case. Come to us, explain what it is you want the money for. Do you think that 95% of the crap that the politicians have spent our money on in the last 50 years, do you think we would have said yes if we had been asked? No, absolutely not. The answer would have been no. And they have spent us into oblivion. Let's just look at this. $37 trillion. The politicians have just write checks, and they can't stop. They can't stop writing the checks. And it's just wild. And this is the damage that the politicians have done. The Federal Reserve and the politicians have done this together. They've done this to us. And again, they don't like, government, Federal Reserve people, they don't like to look at charts like this. They don't like to look at this because this shows them, how much they have bankrupted this country and what a horrible, lousy job that they have done. Absolutely atrocious. So, and again, this is what happens. This is what happens when you take us off the gold standard. The spending just completely balloons completely out of control and into the stratosphere. But hold on, but let's go back for a second. Let's just go over some of these key findings from the central bank gold survey, gold reserve survey. So let's see here. Similar to findings for previous surveys, central banks continued to hold favorable expectations on gold. Respondents overwhelmingly, 95%, believe that global central bank gold reserves will increase over the next 12 months. This year, a record 43% of respondents believe that their own gold reserves will also increase over the same period. Interestingly, none of our respondents anticipate a decline in the gold reserves. Gold's performance during times of crisis, portfolio diversification, and inflation hedging are some key things driving plans to accumulate more gold over the coming year. In addition, gold's unique characteristics and role as a strategic asset continue to be valued by central banks. Its performance in times of crisis, ability to act as a store of value, and its role as an effective diversifier continue to be cited as key reasons for an allocation to gold. The majority of respondents, 73%, see moderate or significantly lower U.S. dollar holdings within global reserves over the next 5 years. Respondents also believe that the share of other currencies, such as the euro, renminbi, as well as gold, will increase over the same period. The survey highlights an uptick in respondents who actively manage their gold reserves from 37% in 24 to 44% in 25. While enhancing returns remained the primary reason for this risk management leapfrogged tactical trading as the second most selected reason. The Bank of England remains the most popular vaulting location for gold reserves amongst respondents, 64%. A significantly higher percentage of respondents reported some domestic storage of gold reserves this year than they did last year, 59% in 25 versus 41% in 24. And just 7% of respondents indicated that they plan to increase domestic storage of gold reserves over the next 12 months. So again, very interesting stuff. I find respondents also believe that the share of other currencies such as the euro and renminbi as well as gold will increase over the same period. Could that have something to do with a certain event called the Rio Reset, which is coming up here in just 3 short weeks? Could that have something to do with it? Maybe, perhaps. Perhaps that could have something to do with why they are saying that the amount of U.S. dollars held in reserve will be decreasing over the next 5 years. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. Inquiring minds want to know. And then I'm going to go over this last article here before I jump into some of the other things here. So value of central banks gold holdings hits a record high in 24 amid soaring price. So, the value of central bank gold holdings hit a record high in 2024 with Germany and Italy leading the world as gold prices continue to soar, according to S&P Global. Global appetite for safe haven assets boosted the consensus price outlook for gold in 2025 and 26, according to a June 5th note from S&P Global Commodity Insights Metals and Mining Research Team. JP Morgan thinks $4,000 an ounce is in the cards for gold in 2026, given recession probabilities and ongoing trade and tariff risks, according to a June 10th note. The London Bullion Market Association price ended 24 at $2,625 an ounce, up from the $2,065 an ounce a year prior, according to market intelligence, and the price has skyrocketed at 25. The gold price broke the $3,400 an ounce threshold in late April. It did so again on June 13th, jumping to $3,400 an ounce when Israel attacked nuclear and military structures in Iran. That was just short of the $3,426 an ounce record set on April 22nd. Now, what's interesting about this is that I can remember seeing reports as far back as 2000 that basically I saw people that were calling for this. I saw people that basically looked at the gold market, if you will, and basically said, hey, over the next 25 years, we're going to see this massive resurgence in gold, and gold could hit $2,500, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 an ounce. And I remember looking at that back in 2000, even 2005, going, that's crazy. $2,000, $3,000 an ounce for gold, like that. Like, yeah, I don't, but yet here we are. Gold's at over $3,400 an ounce for a 1 ounce gold coin. 1 ounce gold coin, $3,400. So just amazing. Central banks with over $10 billion in gold assets. Deutsche Bank, 280. Let's see here. European central banks got 42. Where's China? Is China on here? No, of course China's not on here. They're not going to tell you how much gold they got. China's got a lot of, they're sitting on a lot of gold, guaranteed. Those guys are, yeah, they're stockpiling that gold like crazy, baby. Our gold, I don't know. We won't, nobody will go over to Fort Knox. Nobody will knock on the door and check in and see what's going on over there. So, so it's very interesting. There. So, okay, let me ask a question here. So if I'm saying this gentleman, I did get a question in the chat here. So if I'm saying this gentleman's name, I apologize if I'm not saying this name right. So Malek asked, "Hi, where is your link?" So I'm not sure what link you're referring to. If you could post more specific, I could try to answer that question there for you. So, but anyway, okay. Let's switch gears here for just a second. So this is the point in the show where I usually like to talk about the episodes that I put out this week. And I also like to give you guys economic indicator information as to what is coming up this week. We have a very busy week on the economic indicator front. So here's what we have coming out this week. So Monday, June 23rd, we have the manufacturing PMI. We get the services PMI, existing home sales, and the FOMC member Bowman, Mickey Bowman, is going to speak. On Tuesday, June 24th, we get CB consumer confidence. Fed Chair Jeremy Powell is going to speak at 10 a.m. 2-year Treasury note auction. There will be a lot of eyes on that. Fed Vice Chair for Supervision Barr is going to speak at 4 p.m. API weekly crude oil stock. On Wednesday, June 25th, we get building permits. Fed Chair Powell is going to speak again at 10 a.m. New home sales. We get the 5-year Treasury note auction. On Thursday, June 26th, continuing jobless claims, initial jobless claims, durable good orders, GDP numbers for the first quarter, pending home sales, 7-year Treasury note auction. And then on Friday, June 27th, we get core PCE price index, the Fed's preferred inflation indicator, personal spending, the Michigan consumer sentiment, and the Fed bank stress test results. So, man, it's going to be a week. That is a lot of economic indicator action coming out this week here. So, okay, so what episodes did I put out this week? So on Monday, I had episode 405, and I did a bank M&A market update. So that episode provided an update on the bank M&A market for the first half of 2025. We looked at 3 articles from S&P Global. We reviewed a blog post from PCBB titled Stats Show 2025 is M&A's year, but what's helping deals succeed? Bank M&A was quiet for the most part of 2024 and then picked up toward the end of the year. 2025 is also off to a slow start, but there is optimism that deal volume will pick up. So obviously, interest rates continue to weigh on what's going on with banks, but from a regulatory perspective, a lot of regulation has been canceled or put on the sidelines. Deal volumes are getting back to normal, meaning a lot of banks are able to get deals done starting to come back to that 12 to 18 month time frame. That in and of itself is going to help a lot more deals get done. And I think as the tariff issue begins to clarify itself over the next 6 months, I do think we will begin to see some deal activity pick up. Now, obviously, again, if we do see some interest rate cuts, if we do see some interest rate reductions, that's going to also help the M&A market immensely. So we shall see what happens. But some really good numbers in that episode if you want, again, to get a little bit more complete detail on what's happening in the M&A market. On Tuesday, I poured out episode 406. So billions of bank sub-debt is about to reprice. So this episode examined an article from Bank Director titled Billions of Sub-Debt is Set to Reprice, Forcing Banks to Explore Options. So banks issued billions in subordinated debt in 2020 and 2021. That debt is about to be repriced. Bank boards and management teams have some interesting decisions to make. So that was a really dynamite article that was done in Bank Director there, talking about basically how banks had used subdebt. And it really gets into a great conversation about banks' capital stack. There are a number of different techniques that you can do to raise capital at bank. One of them is issuing debt. And so again, there are pros and cons to everything. And at that moment in 2020, when they started issuing a lot of this sub debt, 2020, 2021, the market was right. Terms were very favorable. It looked like a really good deal. Now, 5 years later, a lot of interest rate increases later, those sub debts are looking, that debt is looking mighty expensive. Some banks are in a position where they can just, they can retire it, meaning pay it off and not do it. Some banks may retire some of it and maybe roll it over or reissue it, whatever. So there could be a number of different strategies out there to that banks can deal with, but it is a very interesting conversation that you can have there on this topic as far as like how do banks manage their capital? What can they do here in this situation? So again, I thought it was a fantastic article. On Wednesday, episode 407. So what are the 7 traits of great leadership? So this episode examined an article from Independent Bank magazine titled, What Makes a Leader Truly Great? Experts Weigh In. And this article shared 7 traits of great leaders. Those traits included putting people first, make community a top priority, lead with authenticity, listen and respond mindfully, value education, make thoughtful but efficient decisions, and lift others up. So also in that episode, I talked a lot about different leadership styles in terms of servant leadership, transitional leadership, transactional leadership, transformational leadership, agile leadership, strategic leadership. There's a myriad of different leadership styles. But again, and I talked about how a lot of people, you don't have to have one dominant style all the time. You can switch gears and you can use these different styles at different times and in different situations, depending on what is needed in that moment. I talked about how a lot of people use servant leadership as that's kind of like their overarching style, if you will. And then they'll use some of the other styles when necessary. So again, interesting conversation. I think a lot more to be had there on that leadership conversation. There's also a big difference between leadership and management. Those are 2 different things. I think a lot of times people confuse the 2. I don't think a lot of people see them, most of the time as being separate things, but they are. A leader is got the vision. A leader is going to set the course. They're going to say, okay, here's where we want to go. The manager is going to manage operations and logistics, and they're going to get, they're going to hire all the people and set all the policies and procedures and get everybody, make sure everybody's rowing in the same boat. They're going to look at the value chain of the company, and they're going to make sure that everything is working the way that it should to follow the vision set forth by the leader. That's some of the big difference there. So, but again, I'll get into obviously a lot more of that in later episodes. So, okay. Episode 408 was called What is Prop Tech? So this episode examined a blog post from PCBB titled What is Prop Tech and how can it help with CRE lending? In other words, commercial real estate lending. Prop tech is the marrying of real estate and technology to change the way that real estate is marketed, sold, and managed. Some examples include Zillow, Airbnb, Appfolio, and Buildium. Prop tech can help banks in the following ways: with commercial real estate transactions, risk management, lending decisions, streamlining the lending process, and competitiveness. So again, very interesting topic from a technology perspective and how this technology, again, it was interesting because it was the first time I had ever heard the term prop tech. I had never heard that before. I'd never heard these companies referred to as prop tech. So it was kind of interesting. But I absolutely see what they're talking about there and how a lot of new technology is changing the way that banks manage and underwrite and assess, different risks associated with all different types of property types and property sizes and everything else. And then finally, on Friday, yesterday, I did episode 409, which was Should Your Bank Implement a Digital Lending Platform? So in this episode, examined a blog post from PCBB titled Benefits of Digital Lending Keep Growing Along with Loan Volume. So the market for small business loans continues to grow. A digital lending platform can provide borrowers with the convenience of applying for loans at the time, place, and using the device that is best for them. Digital lending can help banks with faster loan decisions, more consistent lending decisions, improved accuracy, better compliance, and a competitive advantage. Digital lending can also help banks save money and build a better loan portfolio. So, yes, a lot of advantages to building a digital platform, no doubt. Also, some tremendous headaches to building a digital platform, I might add, and it can be costly and insanely costly and time consuming. but I think it's worth it. I do believe it's worth it at the end of the day. But like I said, if you got interest, check out that episode. Let me just talk for a minute about the next couple of weeks. So I've got a kind of working on a ton of stuff for the next couple of weeks. I've got some interviews coming up. I've got some special episodes coming up. So like, for example, 4th of July, I am planning on doing a special episode about Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations. I figured it was a perfect time. 4th of July, why not have a conversation about capitalism, the father of capitalism, and how did that started, and talk about his major conceptual work, which was The Wealth of Nations, give a little bit of background on Adam Smith, and talk about how monumental the fact that The Wealth of Nations was published in 1776 is just, that always is wild to me. Like how, I just, how you, in certain respects, don't see kind of divine intervention in a lot of the stuff that went into the founding of the country. I mean, how did all of that stuff happen so perfectly at right in that moment that, you have the Declaration of Independence and Adam Smith writes The Wealth of Nations, and which basically is the conceptualization of capitalism, which influences, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton and George Washington and all these other founding fathers to basically say, yeah, you know what? That's the economic system that we need. That's what we want to put forth. Free market capitalism. That's what we want for the American economy. This is how we want the American economy to grow. I mean, it's fascinating. So I'm going to be doing a special July 4th episode on that. The week after July 4th, so that would be July, I think, starting July 7th. So the 7th through the 11th, that is going to be book week. I've got 5 book reviews that I've been waiting for a while to put out on 5 different individuals. All finance, all business related individuals. I'll announce their names probably next week on next week's live stream after I'm finished putting them all together. So again, got kind of the normal slate of episodes coming out next week. We're gonna have an updated episode to the crypto series. I'm working on an AI update that I'm hoping people might find interesting, and as well as a couple of other things in the works for next week. And then, like I said, the week after 4th of July week, have a couple of normal episodes, hopefully a couple of interviews in there, and then the special July 4th episode is going to come out. And then, like I said, in the following week after that's going to be book week. And then after book week, well, obviously I'll get back to, kind of normal slate of episodes. But I'm hoping that, people will find book week very interesting. I'm hoping that there are some stories there, some individuals that maybe you might have heard of but haven't really read much about. And like I said, I feel like I picked a slate of highly entertaining characters, if you will, from the financial world. Almost, one would say, almost as entertaining as you could possibly get. So like I said, so again, I hope people would, again, I've done a lot of book reviews, but I've never done, a bunch in one week. So again, I'm just hoping that I'm experimenting a little bit. Hopefully, people will find some of that stuff a little interesting. Okay. All right, so I want to read you guys some bank news, and then I also want to read you guys a blog post here. So this is from Naomi Snyder, who is the editor in chief over at Bank Director. And she basically wrote this. The title of this blog post was called Dismal Forecast. So it's often said that economics is the dismal science. And this week it appeared to be so. Economists, usually not fans of tariffs, have begun to roll out their predictions for growth in the wake of the White House's ongoing global trade war. Notably, the World Bank published a report this week predicting a weakening of global growth to 2.3% in 2025. That sliced nearly half a percentage point over what had been expected at the start of the year and included deceleration in most economies relative to last year. The sharp increase in tariffs and the ensuing uncertainty are contributing to a broad-based growth slowdown and deteriorating prospects in most of the world's economies. The report said inflation is expected to stay high, in part because of tariffs. The geopolitical tensions remain elevated. In the United States, the Eurozone, and Japan, the prospects are even worse. The World Bank projected real GDP growth in the U.S. of 1.4% in 25 and 1.6% in 26, down from the estimated 2.8% in 2024. Only 6 months ago, a soft landing appeared to be in sight. The global economy was stabilizing after an extraordinary string of calamities, both natural and man-made, over the past few years. The organization warned that moment has passed. Other headwinds include global debt levels, with nations paying high interest rates on that debt. If conditions don't change, the World Bank estimates that global GDP growth will average just 2.5% in the 2020s, the lowest pace of any decade since the 1960s. If that weren't bad enough, I wanted a stiff drink after listening to a recent Moody's Analytics podcast. Chief economist Mark Zandi summed up his conclusions on the May jobs report from the U.S. Department of Labor, adding in a LinkedIn post that the economy may slow to 1% growth rather than the 2% we have come to see as typical. He wrote, with all the negativity in the air, it's easy to overreact, but even the World Bank offers a path to a brighter outlook. Trade tensions could resolve on fruitful negotiations between countries. A lowering of interest rates among the world's central banks could fuel more growth, and recent advances in technology, including artificial intelligence, could lead to widespread investment and productivity gains. While that might not make economic reports jovial, it would be a start. So just, an interesting report there from what the World Bank is coming in and reporting on, basically saying, obviously, they see a lot lower growth. I don't disagree with their forecast in the short run. Are we going to continue to see this much lower pace throughout the rest of the year and into 2026? I don't think so. I really do think things will really start to pick up. I think toward the end of the second half of the year, I think fourth quarter this year, I really think throughout 2026, we will see things start to improve, start to get a lot better, particularly, again, what did it say here at the end of the blog post? A lowering of interest rates among the world's central banks could fuel more growth. No, you know what? Yes, absolutely. So hopefully we do get some lower rates, and hopefully that will help. Hopefully, a lot of the tariff stuff works out. We do get lower rates, and a lot of stuff will improve. So that's my thought, but we shall see what happens. So, all right, let me bring you guys some banking news, because I wanted to get to the whole Genesis Act getting passed in the House this week. So what do we have here? So housing starts, building permits fall in May. Mortgage rates dipped. We talked about that. Mortgage applications decreased. FDIC to meet next week on mega bank capital rules. So the FDIC announced it will meet at 10 a.m. on Thursday, June 26th, to discuss modifications to enhance supplementary leverage ratio standards for global systemically important bank holding companies, total loss absorbing capital, and long-term debt requirements. So yes, that will be a very interesting meeting. I'm sure some very interesting things will come out of that. Retail sales down in May. We talked about that. Industrial production capacity utilization down in May. We talked about that. That was like the Philly Fed manufacturing numbers and stuff like that. Business inventories, sales flat in April. Talked about that a little bit earlier too. Business confidence, builder confidence down in June. Yeah, we talked about that. Treasury endorses new international payment standards. So the Treasury Department endorsed the Financial Action Task Force new international payments standards and said it supports FATF reports on counter illicit finance. So the FATF said the changes to recommendation 16 of its standard, referred to as the travel rule, in the context of virtual assets, will ensure consistency of information required in payment messages to build a clearer picture of who is sending and receiving money, and will help to eliminate fraud and error affecting customers. So earlier this week, the FATF announced it would release new recommendations to streamline information collected for cross-border payments, with compliance set for 2030. It also said reports are coming on complex proliferation and sanctions evasion schemes, terrorist financing risks, and the implementation of standards for virtual assets and virtual asset service providers. Treasury's Falkender lays out principles for BSA modernization. So Deputy Treasury Secretary Michael Falkender shared the Trump administration's guiding principles for modernizing the Bank Secrecy Act regulations. So speaking in Washington, Falkender said BSA regulations should derive from a clear statutory mandate, be efficient, and strike an appropriate balance between costs and benefits, and be fair and objective. He also said regulators should be efficient in mitigating risk and transparency in their actions. So, okay. Senate passes the Genius Act, lays out stablecoin regulatory framework. So ICBA pledged to continue working with Congress on legislation to establish a regulatory framework for payment stablecoins following Tuesday's 68-30 bipartisan Senate vote to pass the Genius Act. So the Genius Act outlines requirements for payment stablecoin issuance by banks and non-banks, including reserve and AML BSA requirements to establish a federal regulatory framework for the largely unregulated stablecoin market. So obviously, yes, huge things, huge news. This gets us, really one step closer to having a regulatory framework around stablecoin. And obviously a lot of different things coming in there. If you have followed the crypto series, I have been following this and talking about it. I also showed some very interesting reports that were put out about a month ago. No, not even a month ago. 3 weeks ago, by the Treasury Department, looking at stablecoins and basically saying hey, if we pass this legislation and the demand for stablecoin really starts to pick up, banks could see a decline in their deposits because people may decide to take money in the banks and put it into stablecoin. There will also potentially be a much greater demand from consumers to basically say, hey, we want to invest money in stablecoin. Can we invest through the bank? Are there some kind of custodial services for digital assets at the bank that we can utilize? So again, a lot of that stuff is coming here quickly. So on a side note, so the Senate passes the stablecoin bill without the ICBA opposed credit card amendments. I think that was a good thing. So the guiding and establishing national innovation for U.S. stablecoin Genius Act excludes an amendment from Senators Roger Marshall to establish new credit card routing requirements that he and Senator Richard Durbin have sought to advance in previous Congresses. ICBA said community bankers have repeatedly told Congress the policy would force a costly overhaul of the payments landscape and credit card rewards program and reduce consumer access to credit for the benefit of large merchants. So I guess I kind of have a little bit of mixed feelings. I see what ICBA is talking about. My thought on this legislation was there could potentially be some good things in there, but it's a very muddled piece of legislation where a lot of stuff is not really clearly laid out. They want to create this third rail to try to take business away, basically try to take the duopoly away from basically Visa and MasterCard, which again, I'm not against that, but who's the third person? What's this third rail that you want to put in? And this is what ICBA is talking about of the upheaval to the payment landscape. Now, I think they take it a little too far with the whole this is going to end all credit card rewards programs and it's going to reduce the consumer's access to credit. No, it's not. It's not going to do that. But again, I just think I could get behind this legislation if they were a lot clearer about what exactly it is they're proposing. Like what are all the details of this third payment rail that you want to develop, and who is this other magical player this third player that's going to come along to compete against Visa and MasterCard. Like that stuff is just really unclear. What is all this? And what do you want to do in terms of bringing down fees and charging bank fees and all this kind of other stuff? So again, I think a lot more. I think they were wise. The Senate was very wise to not include that, to leave that out, because that would have just caused other issues. CFPB extends the 1071 compliance deadline. Yes. Big thing here. So the CFPB published an interim final rule to extend its 1071 small business reporting rules compliance and reporting dates as a result of 3 ongoing legal challenges to the 2023 final rule. Some institutions, including all ICBA members, are protected by court orders that temporarily stay the rules compliance deadline. So basically it got pushed back a year. And so at the beginning of the year, I did one of the regulatory updates that I do, where I basically talk about okay, what's the big hot button regulation that's out there right now for banks? And I had 3 big things that were on my radar this year, and it was 1071 reporting, which is basically all reporting from small. It's basically the federal regulators wanting banks to report a ton of new demographic and all kinds of other information on small business owners. Like this has been their wet dream for a number of years now, and they look like they finally got it through, but not quite yet, not so fast. The other 2 things were open banking and beneficial ownership information. Obviously, beneficial ownership information for the most part has been killed, but it's not dead yet, because banks are still collecting beneficial ownership information. That has to stop. That piece of it has to stop. That has to get put to, it's still kind of sitting out there on life support. Like it's not like everybody thinks it's like full. It's not completely and fully dead. I reported on that a couple weeks ago. There is a chance that it could come back again. So that we got to put a stake in that heart. The third thing was open banking. Don't want open banking. Adamantly opposed to open banking. I'm going to show you guys an article here in a few minutes about how open banking may still yet, be, again, they're trying to, the new administration is trying to kill open banking, thankfully. But it may yet survive or may last. We shall see. Okay, let's see a couple more things here. So ICBA changes to capital buffer must maintain safety at too big to fail institutions. So ICBA is encouraged the Federal Reserve to consider the safety and soundness implications of proposed changes to capital rules and requirements for the largest banks, noting these institutions pose the greatest threat to financial stability, the economy, and consumers. Fidelity Digital Assets applies for OCC charter. It's kind of interesting. So Fidelity Digital Assets submitted a new bank charter application with the OCC. So have to keep an eye on that. FATF updates money laundering terrorist financing lists. So, okay. Senate bill includes the acre tax credit exemption. So the Senate's proposed budget reconciliation bill includes an ICBA advocated provision to make 25% of interest income on agriculture and ranch real estate loans exempt from federal taxation. So there you go. Agencies request information on targeting payments fraud. So ICBA applauded the federal banking agencies for announcing a request for comment on potential actions to help consumers, businesses, and financial institutions mitigate the risk of payment fraud. Okay. The FSISAC highlights prevalence of DDoS attacks against the financial sector. So the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center's latest weekly risk summary highlights the disproportionate increase in distributed denial of service attacks on the financial sector compared to other industries. So the DDoS attacks against the financial sector increased 23% from 23 to 24. The adoption of application programming interfaces in financial services has expanded the sector's threat surface. The malicious actors have evolved their tactics in response. So let me say that last sentence again. because I want everybody to understand this goes right back to my point on open banking. The adoption of application programming interfaces, which are also known as, what's the acronym? APIs. Okay, APIs are great, but there are external APIs and there are internal APIs. The internal APIs are fine, totally secure, no issue. External APIs are a nightmare. And what does it say in here? The adoption of APIs in financial services has, expanded the sector's threat surface, and malicious actors have evolved their tactics in response. So what did open banking want to do? Well, open banking wanted to make it possible for any company that wanted to get the bank's data to just hook up an external API to the back of a back portal in the back of the bank. Oh, wow, that's really interesting. And they wanted banks to spend millions of dollars to create these portals to allow any company, Google, Amazon, Meta, whoever, to come and just plug their API and siphon the data out. And a bunch of the critiques that I had were, wait a minute, APIs are not secure. It's not a question of if you get hacked. It's a question of when you get hacked, and when you get hacked, how you're going to lose an insane amount of your customers' data. And oh, by the way, this is massively going to drive up costs and expenses for a lot of banks, and might even potentially put some smaller banks completely out of business altogether because of the costs associated with it. So that is why I say no, absolutely not to open banking. Now, again, people are free to disagree with me. That's fine. I'm sure they will, but it is what it is. So that is your banking news for the moment. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. I don't think I did. All right. Let's get back to our regularly scheduled program here. Let's get back into some other articles here. All right, and we got about 20 minutes left here, so I am going to try to blow through some of these at a rather quick pace here. Not too quickly, but a little quickly. All right. Interesting article here. Data center construction boom faces local resistance in 28 states. So more than half the world's server farms are already operating in the United States, with thousands more being planned. And this is construction in this picture here. This is construction of an Amazon Web Services data center in Boardman, Oregon. Obviously, another one of these million square foot behemoth data centers. Ridiculous. The need for data centers to drive 21st century cloud computing and win the AI race with China is a matter of such national urgency that Energy Secretary Chris Wright described it as the United States' next Manhattan Project. But assessing how many data centers, a ubiquitous term for server farms, supercomputer networks, and Bitcoin and crypto mines, exist right now in the United States, is in and of itself a quixotic foray into computing. There were a reported 5,426 data centers in the United States in March. So the real question here, so the data centers they take up a lot of space, but what do they do? What do the data centers do? Well, they use a ridiculous amount of energy, and they also use an insane amount of water. So a lot of the new data centers that are being proposed like basically as close as they can get to nuclear power plants. They're also, they're like here in Pennsylvania. Microsoft came in and they're paying to spruce up. They want to get 3 Mile Island back online. They want to build a massive data center right next to 3 Mile Island. So you're seeing things like that going on right now. And I think a lot of states, rightly so, are basically going to say, wait a minute. We can't just build this ridiculous number of data centers that just siphon up all of our nuclear energy and all the water and everything else. Just so, these big conglomerate, just so not conglomerate, but the big, tech companies can get their data for their AI, so I think there needs to be a very, balanced conversation here. Like I get that. Okay. AI is a big thing, but again, I don't think we've really understand, well, what is the race? Like where exactly are we trying to get? if we're trying to get to some kind of super AI intelligence that's going to dominate us all, I'm not really sure I want to get there. I'm not really sure I want to win that race. I think there needs to be a lot more conversation around this, which I think is good. I think it looks like that's exactly where this is going to go. So again, just interesting to note, keep an eye on. I mean, banks undoubtedly all across the country are getting phone calls like, "Hey, I want to build a warehouse, or I want to build an industrial. I want to build an industrial property to house data centers. Can you finance this project for us?" Like, so, this is, again, just interesting things to think about. Nearly 30-year-old capital gains tax exemption rules blamed for U.S. housing shortage. Many homeowners avoid selling because of high capital gains taxes, prompting real estate professionals to call for changes. So, with median home prices exceeding $1 million in many U.S. housing markets, some real estate professionals are drawing attention to a 28-year-old capital gains tax law, citing it as one factor contributing to the nationwide housing shortage. So, a recent report from Realtor.com shows that California is home to 8 out of the 10 most expensive housing markets in the United States. San Jose topped the list with a median sales price of $2 million, followed by Anaheim and San Francisco at $1.45 million and $1.32 million, respectively. Ken DeLeon, founder of DeLeon Realty in Palo Alto, told the Epoch Times that some communities in the San Francisco Bay Area have experienced skyrocketing home prices, which have jumped 667% on average since 1997. Since the year the Taxpayer Relief Act was signed into law, allowing married homeowners to exclude up to $500,000 in capital gains from the sale of their primary residence and $250,000 for a single homeowner. This outdated capital gains law has resulted in an artificially created housing shortage, DeLeon said. A lot of older people who have lived in their homes for 30 years or more want to sell, but the value of those homes has tripled or quadrupled now. Some of these sellers could be facing capital gains taxes of over $1 million. So according to a HUD report, the median cost of a single family home in 1997 was $153,000, compared with $414,000 in April of 2025. With the combined federal and state capital gains tax rates now at 37.1% in California, potential sellers seeking to avoid elevated tax exposure are choosing instead to remain in their current properties. So again, very interesting. The problem, unfortunately for California, is that these capital gains taxes, where they're currently set, pretty much works for 95% of the rest of the country. It's only in a few pocketed, maybe parts of Connecticut, parts of New York, parts of Jersey, maybe they might see a lot of some similar things there. But I think for the most part, most other places, basically, homeowners excluded up to $500,000 in capital gains on the sale of their house. I think most homeowners out there are going to be just fine. So, but again, I see the point of what this article is trying to make, that, hey, maybe we do need to go back and look at these capital gains taxes in certain situations, and basically recognize that, yes, the price of housing has dramatically increased here in the last 20 years. And maybe we need to revise some of these numbers slightly. So again, interesting point made, interesting thing to think about. Do I think anything is going to happen with this right now? No. But, maybe this could gain some traction heading into the future. We'll see. Blue-collar wages under Trump post the largest increase in almost 60 years. Wage numbers are even higher than the improvement seen at the start of Trump's first term. So in the first 5 months of President Donald Trump's second term, blue-collar hourly workers have experienced a nearly 2% increase in real wage growth, the most significant growth under any administration since President Richard Nixon. The new Treasury Department data suggests real inflation-adjusted hourly wage growth is up 1.7% year-to-date for production and non-supervisory workers. By comparison, real wages declined 1.7% during the first 5 months under the previous administration. The last time wages outpaced inflation at this pace was during the president's first term. So Again, today's data confirm what we saw during President Trump's first administration. Pro-growth policies like tax reform and deregulation had a measurable impact on real wages, especially for blue-collar workers. This isn't theoretical. It is showing up in the paychecks for everyday Americans. Yes, absolutely. More of this. More of this. Okay. All right. So some China articles here. Interesting time to be a banker in China. So from mega lenders to rural branches, China's banking purge intensifies amid financial turmoil, ejecting hundreds of bankers. China's anti-graft sweep signals a high-stakes reboot of lenders buckling under bad property loans and trillions of local debt. So a nearly 3-year running anti-corruption drive has swept through every corner of China's financial sector, toppling hundreds of mid and high-level banking officials from vice ministerial figures at Beijing headquarters to branch managers in remote counties. The campaign, which began in late 2022, now blankets all 6 state-owned mega banks, the 3 big policy lenders, and dozens of provincial city institutions. Since 23, at least 200 banking officials have been investigated or punished, according to the Epoch Times tallies based on official announcements. The purge comes as China's banking system wrestles with a property market collapse that vaporized collateral values and a mountain of hidden local government liabilities, an explosive mix that has already forced the merger, dissolution, and deregistration of 162 small banks in 2024 alone. So, yeah, very interesting. Not a great time to be a banker over in China. U.S. tariffs may drive China's economy into a depression, experts say. So exports made up 1/3 of China's economic growth last year. Export numbers are hard for the regime to forge as they have to match other countries' imports. So, yes, so basically saying that this, our basically tariff war with China could push them into a depression. Now, what evidence do we have of this? I give you Exhibit A. Debt closures and despair sweep China's east. A surge of business closures has hit one of China's wealthiest regions with recovery nowhere in sight. So China's ongoing economic downturn is taking a heavy toll on private enterprises in the eastern coastal region, which was once considered the driving force behind the country's economic rise. Many business owners have shared on social media or in interviews that they are overwhelmed by debt amid a steep drop in orders. Some have already shut down their businesses and had held farewell meals with employees. A few have even openly expressed thoughts of suicide. Unfortunately, I guess I hope not. Industries such as food and beverage, e-commerce, manufacturing, and construction are showing clear signs of significant hardship, according to several business owners who spoke to the Chinese language edition of the Epoch Times. So Zhao, an e-commerce operator in Yangzhou, Jingzheng province, said many people in this area have seen their wages cut or lost their jobs altogether. He requested that only his surname be used, citing fears of retaliation from the Chinese regime. Few can afford to eat out anymore. He said street vendors can still scrape by, but even they aren't making real money. Zhu Zinying, who had run a furniture factory in Hangzhou, Zhejiang province for more than a decade, told the Chinese language edition, again, language time, that she had no choice but to shut down her business. We haven't had a single order in 3 months. The warehouse is full of unsold goods, and I still have to pay rent. Part of her business has relied on exports to the United States, but amid U.S.-China trade tensions, those orders have all but disappeared. Many others in the furniture industry are in the same situation. It's either deep clearance sales or total shutdown. She noted that the industry's collapse is closely tied to China's faltering property sector. With no one buying homes, there's no demand for furniture. She estimates that home prices have fallen by 40% to 50% since 2016. Even land auctions held by local governments are getting no bids. So, yes. So again, just bad stuff happening over there economically in China that, again, most people are just not hearing about. Again, stablecoin legislation will juice demand for treasuries to a point. So issuers of digital currencies need treasury bills for their reserves, but analysts say the consequences are uncertain. So yes, probably more on that later. Jamie Dimon says that he is not retiring anytime soon. The chief executive's would-be successors will need to wait at least a few more years before he is gone. So, yep. So apparently Jamie Dimon, 69, said his retirement at JP Morgan Chase is still several years away. So he's going to make him wait. Jamie said, not so fast. It's not time for me to run for president yet. All right, let's see what's happening here. Open banking to survive Trump, fintechs say. So this is what I was talking about a few minutes ago. So consumers and financial services firms will pursue their interest in data sharing despite a move by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to extinguish the trend industry experts contend. So an open banking trend allowing banks and payment players to more easily share consumer data is likely to advance regardless of this vacillating U.S. regulatory policy, industry lawyers and executives say. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has decided to let open banking regulations take effect next year, but those 2026 compliance dates are thrown into question last year when the bank group sued the government to block the CFPB's open banking rule. Yeah, then it goes to, so they're basically trying to kill it. But basically what this article says is that the fintech companies are still going to move forward and do this. But yeah, okay, that's great. Okay, fintech, they can do this all they want. They're not going to be able to, for the key here was for the CFPB to force banks to do this. Okay, the CFPB is not going to force the banks to do this. This is not going to happen, at least not in this administration. So fintechs can push this all they want. It's not, but the key is they're not going to be able to force banks to do this. If there's a couple banks out there that want to do this, okay, so be it. But 99% of banks are not going to do this unless they could come up with some major profit motive, perhaps, for banks to want to do this. And if they could dramatically find a way to manage or minimize the risks, it's not going to happen. So, so again, you could say out there all you want. All right, let's see here. I only got a couple minutes left. I actually did have a couple things here that I wanted to get into with everybody. But I might just, hold those. I'm probably going to hold those. I wanted to get into this thing, how 3 banks are capitalizing on AI. But I might, I might save that for next week. So, you know what I'm going to do now, guys? I'm going to wrap up because like I said, I still had about, 10 or 11 articles there, but it was just too much to get into in the next 4 minutes. So I'm going to wrap up here I'm going to do my story of the week, my quote of the week that I always end with. So let me get some stuff here for a second. Okay, story of the week today. So we are doing the International Monetary Fund. So the IMF is an international organization that promotes global economic growth and financial stability, encourages international trade, and reduces poverty. Quotas of member countries are a key determinant of the voting power in IMF decisions. Votes comprise 1 vote per 100,000 special drawing rights, or otherwise known as SDR, of quota plus basic votes. SDRs are an international style of monetary reserve currency created by the IMF as a supplement to the existing money reserves of member countries. The IMF's mission is to promote global economic growth and financial stability and regularly provide economic forecasts as well as policy advice for its member countries at the national and international levels on issues such as economic crisis in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. So there you have it. So that is the International Monetary Fund. So, okay, what is our quote of the week? So, okay. This comes to you from Thomas Edison. So, our greatest weaknesses lies in giving up. The most certain way to succeed is always to try just one more time. And that is from Thomas Edison. Of course, Thomas Edison famously went through 10,000 iterations before he came up with the incandescent light bulb. So again, I think he knew a little something about trying one more time. So, or 10,000 more times, if that matter. Anyway, okay. Hope everybody enjoyed the show tonight. Like I said, I'm going to be working on a lot of stuff. I got a lot of good things coming here the next couple of weeks. live stream next week is actually going to be on Friday night, so I'll post that up tomorrow. But live stream tomorrow night our live stream next week will be Friday night. And then actually the live stream the week after is going to be on Sunday. So so I'm doing a little bit of traveling. So unfortunately, live streams are going to get pushed around a little bit here over the next couple. I will have them; I will be here, but they're going to be pushed around to Friday and Sunday, and then 3 weeks later, I should be fine for quite a while, and we should be back to just kind of every Saturday night for a little while there. So, but like I said, so keep an eye out for that, and I'll just wrap up by saying, if you're liking the live stream, if you're liking the episodes I'm putting out, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe, as that really helps the channel. Remember, we are on Rumble, YouTube, and all major podcast platforms. Please be sure to leave your comments, as I always love getting back to everybody. And as always, check out some of the other content on the channel. There's a lot of great stuff out there, whether it's the Lord of Easy Money series, the crypto series, a lot of the interviews I do, book reviews, movie and business related documentaries. A lot of great stuff that I have out there. And then, of course, all the banking related episodes and content that are on the channel. A lot of stuff out there at this point. Over 400 episodes out there for you to explore until your heart is content. Hey, look, you need to go to bed at night. Everybody needs to go to bed at night, right? Put it on. I guarantee you, within 30 seconds, I have you out. No, hopefully it's not that boring, right? But anyway, all right. Well, I hope everyone has a great night out there. Hang in there. Hopefully this Iran thing will blow over. I'm praying it does. And I haven't obviously, I don't know what's happened here in the last 2 hours. Hopefully nothing catastrophic has happened in the last 2 hours. But like I said, I'm praying for the best here. But with that being said, though, I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Enjoy the rest of the night tonight. Like I said, enjoy the week. I'll see everybody again next weekend. Thanks a lot. See you guys later.